Hello and welcome to another episode of Talk3D. Today we have Jenn, who built a company called Dangerous Ladies. They specialized in custom cosplay kits and digital resources. Jenn, welcome to the show. So, Dangerous Ladies, that's a very interesting name. How did you come up with that and what's the inspiration behind that?
So we were 17. It was three of us at the time, myself, Emmy, and Diane. And we had been making a lot of costumes together for, a year or two at something. And we cosplayed as the prominent Dangerous Ladies from Avatar: The Last Airbender. Azula, Tylee, and Mai. There's a one throwaway line in an episode where Sokka describes them being chased by a tank full of dangerous ladies. So we just used it as a username on DeviantArt, and it just stuck.
Awesome.
Yeah, and we just stuck with it.
And then now it's currently now a business, right?
Yes.
So it's blossomed into from a hobby to a business. Can you tell me a little bit about how that came to be and when that came to be?
So I think in 2014 we were working on some costumes from Madoka Magica, and they have these soul gems. So they're these little like gold pieces with a custom gem, and this is what the character's soul is housed in. And we couldn't really find anything on the market. They're hard to make. Anything with a clear part tends to be very hard to make. And Christine had a little bit of resin casting experience, so she decided to make masters and mold them and cast them. And we had a couple of people reach out to us being like, hey, would you do one for me? Because I've been having problems getting the same thing as well. So we did it. We did a couple of them and we sold them here or there. And then as the years went by, every time we do a project, we'd do a little bit of 3D printing and resin work for those. And every time it was just kind of like, okay, so I'm doing this costume and other people also need this pieces and they're willing to pay for it. So that helps us, fund these projects.
For sure. Turning your hobby into a business.
Yeah.
And it's kind of how we started too. So I completely understand where you can kind of channel that passion into something more productive and something that can support you.
Yeah, and at the time it really wasn't like a thought like, okay, I'm going to do this full time. And most of the cosplay community never really had this idea that it would be something that people could go professional with.
Right.
When I started cosplaying in 2002, that was the furthest thing from anybody's minds. Back then, cosplay was sort of like the lowest on the food chain.
Okay.
Like you were the nerdiest of the nerds. You were the people who were such into this loser stuff that you were willing to dress up and pretend to be the character. And back then we all looked like hot messes. We couldn't access wigs. We didn't really have much access to different fabrics and techniques. Not many people had any sewing experience at all. So it really was a labor of love and just passion for what people wanted to do. But as the years go by, people have learned more techniques. It's gotten this bigger thing, and now cosplay's cool.
I know. I was gonna say, like, you didn't really hear much about cosplay because it was more underground and more proprietary, and now it's much more mainstream. At least I feel like it is, or maybe because I just encounter it more because there's 3D printing involved.
Yeah.
But tell me a little bit about how that community blossomed and how you were part of that community, because you've been in it for a while. You made a name for yourselves.
Yeah.
So how has the community supported you in your endeavors?
I've always been a heavy internet user. So back in the day, we had cosplay.com, we had Cosplay Lab, we had a bunch of purpose-built websites that were just for cosplayers. Mm-hmm. And it was a really good opportunity to interact with other cosplayers on these forums. If you were lucky enough to have a digital camera, you could take some snaps at conventions and upload them. And we really built this small, dedicated community of people who were really passionate about this thing and wanted to embody these characters and show off how much they love these characters enough to want to be them, at least for an afternoon. And it just grew, and it's such a helpful community. Right from day one, there were always people posting tutorials and helping others figure out how to do it. And back in the day when you didn't have like YouTube Let's Plays or screen captures or anything, you could sit in front of your TV with a digital camera trying to take pictures of a character just to get reference images. Right. It was really hard back then.
Yeah.
But because of how difficult it was, everyone really banded together to make it more accessible to each other and to really help each other. I didn't feel like there was much competition. And largely even today, that's still the case. Tutorials are everywhere. Everyone's eager to share how they made things and what they're making. It's a great place to learn.
I'm definitely hearing this theme of mentorship, and just community help going back and forth, and there's no requirement for anything other than I just want to help people. I want to progress this art that we all love. Now, tell me a little bit about how you learned to do some of this, because is this community taught or self-research? How did you start doing this at a more professional level from a hobbyist level? Was there a differentiation? Like, when did that click for you from hobbyist to professional?
So I have basically no formal training. I never went to school for sewing. I never went to school for prop making or 3D modeling or anything like that. For me, from day one, it was always just research and learning from others in the community. And it became very important to me to pass on that knowledge as well. But especially really early on, it's like, okay, well, I want to make this. I have to figure out how to make this. I have to learn these techniques. I have to access materials. Right. And I've always been the kind of person where it's like, if you put that sort of thing in front of me, I want to do the research. I want to learn. I want to find out all the ways I can do it, all the ways I can do it in a way that interests me.
Now, are you a person who's like, ask a lot of questions to get it done, or are you more like, I'll just keep reading, I'll find resources, I'll do my research? How do you, what is your learning process?
I read.
Okay.
I will Google search for hours. I will go absolutely ham on that. I'm the sort of type of person where it's like, I don't want to bother experts with like basic or entry level questions. Okay. I want to gather as much information as I can up front so that when I have someone who has who has expertise in front of me, I can ask them the stuff that's harder to Google and harder to find. You know, it's like they have resources that I can't access anywhere else. So I want to focus my time on asking them sort of the big questions.
So are you and your group now an expert resource for a lot of the other people who are just getting into it now?
I hope so. Okay. I mean, I definitely answer a lot of questions. One big thing is that we do a lot of kits. There are sort of a lot of cosplay companies and stuff that focus on finished goods. One thing that's really important to me is to start with kits, and that's different levels. I can sell 3D print files, I can sell the kits themselves, I can do resin, all those sort of things, but people still have to put it together themselves and assemble it themselves. And I think that's important because it's a learning experience, and also because it gives them a sense of authorship over what they've done. Right. It's sort of teach a man to fish, give a man a fish type thing. Sure. It's really important to me that people learn and then can apply themselves. So, I've had lots of, friends, clients, all that stuff in this community who have started off with buying their own costumes or props, and then they'll move to a kit, and then they'll get their own 3D printer and they'll start printing from files, and then they'll start 3D modeling. And it's really amazing to see people graduate through those stages until they're doing more and more on their own. And you can see the sense of pride they have in it, and that's I love that. I love fostering
So
that.
I guess the kit is kind of like the gateway into doing more yourself.
Absolutely.
And I think we're all a little bit nostalgic about kits as well, because whether you have these kits or like little model kits for trains and things like that, as younger kids, we're always like putting them together, sanding them, painting them, and that was our way of creating back then. So let's talk a little bit about your business before we get into some of the tech and some of the stuff that you've done. This is, a very interesting thing for me because it's awesome to see how people grow over a short span of time. They're usually trailblazers. They're like, nothing will stop me from doing this. And, at first it's usually pretty hard, and then you kind of settle into a groove. Tell me a little bit about, your business, how big it is now, what types of customers are you serving on a regular basis?
So right now, we've just finished expanding into a second studio space.
Congrats.
Thank you. We have 7 people full-time, which is fantastic. I love my team, obsessed with them. They're my favorite. It's so good. We probably have about 100 clients at any given time, which is a lot of things moving, a lot of packages going out the door. And like a good chunk of those are kits. And then we also have some custom work that we do for people, and then we have some full costume builds.
And how do you advertise your services? Like, are you just a name now where people know if I want something custom or if I want a kit, I come to you? How do people find out about you guys and what your expertise is?
So we're pretty much entirely word of mouth. I've never paid a cent on advertising on any social media, and I feel pretty strongly about that. We've discovered sort of over the years we want to cater to cosplayers primarily. We're looking for people who kind of know what they're getting into and know what they want to do. So it's a little different working with a cosplayer versus, someone who's never cosplayed in their life, but they're looking to buy a sword for their grandchild for Christmas. There's a different level of expectations in what they're getting there. And it can be a little surprising if you're not a cosplayer to then, in the mail you get a box and it's full of pieces of a sword that you assemble yourself. Right. Totally different vibe. So to me, broad scale advertising never really works. I like word of mouth because it's cosplayers talking with us who are also cosplayers, and they're talking to other cosplayers and giving feedback. So I can really make something that really caters to them, which is so important in my mind because I know what cosplayers need and I know what they want. Yeah. Do they need a prop to be able to break down into pieces to travel across the country to a convention? Do they need something to be lightweight because they're going to be carrying it all day or posing with it? Any number of things like that. The general props market isn't necessarily going to take that into account. But we're cosplayers, so we know that. And we know what we want out of props, we know what others want out of props, and we can adapt to that.
So it's kind of this mentality of, if you like it, if you find it useful, it's probably the same use case for your customers out there as well.
Exactly, and it's like, they're my people.
Yeah.
I'm one of them. I've been cosplaying for almost 20 years at this point. I know what they want, and if they have new ideas, I'm super happy to grow.
So when did you see the opportunity to kind of scale your business from that hobby level to a more professional level? Because now you have full-time employees, so there's a little bit more responsibility and to make sure you have consistent work and so forth. When did that kind of click for you guys to be like, now's the time to kind of go all in for myself, my own time, and then, some of the rest of my team to do that? Was there a point for you, or was it much more organic feeling?
I don't know that there was a specific spot, but I do definitely remember having a feeling that in sort of like the mid-2010s, we were really hitting this apex of store-bought costumes. And I know a lot of cosplayers, especially younger ones who didn't have a lot of sewing experience, found the bar to entry really high. If you're not a good enough seamstress or anything like that, and you feel like there's a lot of competition out there, you have to have your face out there, social media is really tough for stuff like that. It can be really, really challenging and intimidating to make this whole costume for yourself and feel like you're going to be compared to others who have bought these, very, immaculate, professionally made costumes. Right. And we realized that people were really being turned off of cosplay because they felt like the barrier to entry was so steep. Right. And costume designs have gotten more and more complicated. Right. If you look at anime designs from the 90s, they're so simple compared to now. So it's more challenging. And we thought, how many times has someone decided, I'm not going to cosplay this because all of the little fiddly bits, like the custom buttons and the belt buckles and decorations, are so challenging that it really just turns them off the project. We thought, if we do kits, and suddenly that part is easy and people can focus on the sewing or other parts of it that they feel a little more confident in. Suddenly people feel like they have the confidence to tackle this project. And suddenly you're at a convention and you can see 20 takes on the same costume rather than 19 people in the same store-bought costume and then one person who's worked from scratch. And because crafting has always been important to us, for me it was a really big thing. Like, maybe we can turn the tides a little bit here. Maybe we can give people more confidence to craft if they're not worried about having to make 40 little symmetrical 5-pointed stars. Right. That sort of thing. So that was a big shift for me, and I sort of took the mentality of if you make it, they will come.
And it's worked so far? Yeah,
it's worked fantastic. There's a lot of times where I've thought, I don't really think people are going to cosplay this particular character very much because it's got an intimidating design, it's got lots of pieces. And you hear that feedback from people a lot. It's like, I don't want to make that because of that. And then you make the files or you make the resin kit, and all of a sudden you're seeing a whole lot of people cosplaying that character. And a lot of people say, well, I wouldn't have done it if I had to worry about all of these pieces. Yeah. So to me, a big part of it was seeing how we could help people and make cosplay less intimidating and give them the resources to.
I think that sounds like a lot of individual success stories right there of all of your customers going, well, if you didn't do it, I wouldn't have done it. So great job in taking care of your customers.
Thank you.
But I want to talk a little bit about that industry that you just mentioned because, for those of us who are not from the cosplay industry, we may think, oh, wow, it's something very niche. There's no competition around, but competition is fierce, right? So who are the types of people or businesses that you're competing against, and where do you have that edge on them?
So it still is like very much like a little cottage industry. I think in the grand scheme of things, cosplay has never been bigger, but at the same time, it's still very, I feel very big fish, small pond.
Sure.
But nowadays we're in a point of accessibility where anyone can download 3D printing or 3D modeling software. 3D printers have never been more affordable. Anyone can start up a little business where they sell 3D print files or printed kits, stuff like that. Resin a little harder because it's hard to do something like that out of an apartment or a house if you don't have a space to do it in safely. But yeah, lots of people are jumping into it. The thing I sort of see a lot though is that a lot of people want to do this, and I support them. I love competition.
Right.
I'll tell anyone, I'm super happy to see other people join the market and making the same things, even the same stuff as us, because I think it's really cool to see the diversity interpretations, and I like competition. It's a lot of fun. But on the other hand, it's really hard to both be a creator and run a business. And I think the challenge a lot of people face going into it is that it's like, okay, I love 3D modeling, or I love printing, or I love designing these things. I don't love worrying about taxes or invoices or the hassle of shipping and stuff like that. That's a big challenge to a lot of people. I think there are a lot of people who are getting into business in doing this, but a lot of them fizzle out after a year or so because unfortunately, it's very hard to hit that point where you're both financially successful, but also financially successful enough to hire someone to handle the business end of things if you want to focus on creating, which can be a little tricky.
I think the unique thing about some of your products is that it both has a technical aspect to it, but also an artistic aspect. So you can see different variations of the same prop, and I think that's very interesting because it also lets you show off your artistry and your craftsmanship along the way, because that's a big differentiator, when it comes to your reputation and your name. So I think that's a very unique, aspect to what you produce, and it makes a lot of sense what you said. I mean, we've kind of ignored this up to now, but let's talk about it. Let's talk about your wonderful products and how you build some of them. So what do you want to start off with first? What should we show people?
So we can start off with a super basic one-part mold. So I'll show you the finished piece first, just because it's easy.
Yeah.
So this is a resin cast from a mold. And that mold we make from a 3D printed master with a custom printed box. So that looks like this. These days we resin print the masters, and we resin print them on like a 3mm platform, because that way when we pour the mold, we get this really clean lip. It's really uniform. Normally in classic mold making practice, you would print your master and then you'd glue it down to the table, but we found we would get little lips and little seams. Okay. Super common in any sort of mold making. But with 3D printing, we can actually design things on bucks, so you get those really clean edges. Right. And then we also discovered that by doing it by 3D printing, we could follow the exact silhouette of the piece that we were making. That way we could reduce silicone costs, which, a little more environmentally friendly in a generally unfriendly hobby. But it saves big chunks of silicone and stuff that you'd normally just have a big square box around. And we 3D print the boxes themselves, because that way they're all custom fit and very nice. So we'd have something like this. We would sand it to 1 inch of its life, so it's super polished and smooth, and then just pour silicone in. When you pull it out, when it sets, you have a mold, and then you can pour anything you want into it, really.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So let's talk about some of these pieces here. I mean, you've used some resin printing already.
Yes.
I know you use a variety of 3D printing technologies. What else have you got?
So there are different kind of molds. So if you want to make something flat-backed, a flat-back mold like that is fantastic. But sometimes you want to make thing that's fully round or of a fully back edge. So for something like that, for example, we might do the tail on this rat that's not glued in. So we 3D print the bodies, but because this rat hangs from a character's belt, we wanted to be able to cast it in something flexible, and it has to be fully round. If we did this as only a flat back mold like that one, you would only have half a tail, and when you see it in 3 dimensions, it would look like half a tail. Yeah. We also wanted it to be flexible, because if it's flexible, then you can tie it. It's also super stretchy, so it's durable, and also it's creepy. It looks and feels like a rat tail. Yeah. So we did a 2-part mold for that.
I'm mesmerized by the way you're playing with it, because it's so squishy and soft.
It's so disgusting. We keep the duds, because you get them occasionally, and we actually have them tied to a shelf. So there's a whole shelf with a whole row of little rat tails. Half the team hates them, and wants them gone. The other team wants to see the collection go. But either way, so we do a 2-part mold for that. So you can see there's keys all the way around. So that way when it assembles, you get a super tight seam. And when you look at the actual piece, you just get that really neat seam line. Sure. In classical mold making, you would have to clay that up by hand. So you would have to have your rigid master, you'd sort of lay it on a clay platform, and then you'd have to build a clay platform around it and manually stamp keys into it. Super skilled technique. People who can clay up molds like that have incredible skill, especially because you have to get a really tight right angle to the piece so that you get that really clean seam line. And that's fantastic. But we found that it's so much faster just to print it on a buck, especially because in pieces like this that are symmetrical, this is actually the identical mold, but once you rotate it around, you have both halves of it. So you can actually only have to body shop 1/2 of a master, and then you can pour it twice, snap them together, and you have 2 parts of a mold.
And how long do those molds last for you in terms of production?
So there's different types of silicone. There's tin cure, which is a much cheaper silicone. It doesn't last as long. It'll degrade just sitting on a shelf for a couple years. You can usually get, 20 to 30 casts out of that. Some more if you treat it well, or depending on what material you put into. And then there's also platinum cure silicone, like this one. To cast silicone into a silicone mold, you have to use a platinum cure.
Okay.
But it could last, upwards of 50. So it goes a little bit further, which we use kind of depends on how many we expect to do from it. If something wears out, we generally, because we still have the masters, we can just immediately re-pour new molds, which is super handy.
So how do you anticipate your demand, in terms of production for your customers? Do you say, hey, I'm going to do 100 run no matter what, or I'm only going to do as many as pre-ordered? How do you decide how many to do? And if it's 100, do you make 2 of those molds right away so you can kind of survive that capacity? How do you judge?
There's definitely a feel for how popular is this series. So if we feel we're constantly getting messages about a certain character or something, we know that a lot of people are going to do it. So it's usually safe to go ahead right out and make a full resin kit. Usually we make enough pieces or enough molds that we can cast a whole set in 1 or 2 pours. So we'll have a big table and we'll spread out all the molds, we'll mix up all the liquid plastic, pour them all. The ideal for me is that you can pour a full set in one go, which is fantastic. Other times, especially if a kit has, 40 of a certain piece, we don't necessarily want to make 40 molds. So instead what we'll do is we'll make a buck that has maybe 8 of that piece, and we'll make 1 or 2 molds, and then we can cast it a few times to get as many as we need. But overall, our biggest thing is that we want it to be accessible, so we don't want to set and say we need to do 100 of these kits within the next few months, otherwise we won't bother. Instead, the idea is if a couple people ask, we'll mold it and we'll cast it. And then if it takes a couple years for people to put in orders and for a kit to sort of start turning a profit, that's fine to me. I'm not in any huge rush. In the meantime, because we sell 3D print files as well, people at home will buy files and print it themselves. So that can sort of subsidize when we do a physical kit. And that way we can sort of cater to different levels of skill. So if people want to print at home, fantastic, it's available to you. If you're not comfortable printing and you want a resin kit, cool, we do that as well. And we can sort of balance it out amongst people and make it
That's
and
fantastic.
Make it
I feel like, people have so much choice in terms of what involvement level they could be in with you guys, because they can either get the file or they can, do it from scratch, or, it's all there for them to kind of offer up on their involvement level. Now, I see this giant piece in the back, and we've definitely haven't talked about this yet. So how big is this? What is it? And how did you build it?
So this is Lúin from Fire Emblem 3 Houses. It is the hero relic for Ingrid. It is, to my recollection, 80 inches long. I like to do my big props really oversized. The hero relics in the game are huge to begin with, but I find anime characters are so twiggy and slim. If you match the scale to them, in real life you end up with these dinky little weapons. So I like to go big. So I 3D modeled this entirely from scratch, and then we printed it. Much of the handle is dowel. I've seen some kits on the market where people will actually print the handle itself. Why? It's so many hours of printing and a lot of sanding. I like to incorporate a lot of internal structure into my prints. So inside the head are 3 different dowels that help align it and give it strength. That way, when you're slotting pieces together, you know they're going to line up because they're forced to on these straight dowels. Yeah. So we print a bunch of different pieces. This middle part is designed to hide the seam, so the whole pole actually screws apart on a screw.
Okay.
And it's seamless because you've got that piece there. We ended up molding and casting the crests on the gem, the red part, as well as the end finials. So a lot of the hero relics in this game, they have that same end finial. So what we did is we made a mold and cast it. So we know whether we're doing Lúin or Lance of Ruin or Amir or Aridbar, any of those props, we knew that we could just cast the same base instead of printing it over and over.
Right.
And it also helps because the base is solid resin. It means you have a counterweight on the back end, which is super handy.
Fantastic.
Whole thing gets assembled, painted, body shopped, all of those different things. The gem is cast in clear and it's backed with tinfoil, so you get a little bit of that light bouncing out.
It looks fantastic.
Thank you.
I was going to ask how you did that, and you just explained
Yeah, so I love doing crest stones. They're a lot of fun.
That's amazing. And does this break down when you take it to a convention, or is this set in this size?
Like I said, it breaks down. This middle part here is a joint, so you can screw it apart. So this part comes apart into two pieces.
Amazing.
There are some props where it's better and more durable for it to be one solid piece. You know, a lot of like quarter staffs and stuff like that, you know, they're meant to be one solid piece because if they had a joint that's a weak spot, that kind of stuff. But for props, especially when we have a lot of clients and ourselves personally, we say, okay, we're going to jump in the truck and drive, you know, 12 hours to a convention, or you're going on a plane or something. You can't carry an 80-inch lance through airport security. So oftentimes with different projects, I'll design it so that it can break down in many different ways. So we've assembled this so that it comes apart into two pieces. So it comes apart right in that middle spot. But technically the way it's designed, you could put another screw connecting the head from the pole. You could have this pop off the end. So you could have this break down into as many as, you know, 5 or 6 pieces if you wanted to assemble it that way. I like to make things modular like that because then if somebody has to fit it in a 26-inch suitcase, they can. If they'd rather have it in a full piece, that's perfectly doable as well.
That's awesome. So has there ever been a prop where, you know, it's met your match where you said, I can't do this, or you've kind of failed at it and then eventually beat it? Has there anything been overly challenging that we couldn't do?
I wouldn't say there's anything that I haven't been able to do yet, but there definitely have been some head scratchers.
And what do those limitations usually look like?
So the bane of my existence these days is Final Fantasy XIV. I love the designs. They're so much fun. They have so many different pieces on it. How, you know, the mask we have here and this piece is a Final Fantasy XIV piece. However, because it's a multiplayer online game and it's massive and it has crazy requirements for people's computers and consoles to run, means that they have really low resolution textures, which means if you zoom in on the textures of those costumes, a lot of it is just like amorphous gold blobs. So you have a client be like, okay, I want to cosplay Amaric, or I want to cosplay Lise, or any of these stuff, and you're looking at this like, okay, I have to model 50 pieces from this character, and I have to figure out what they look like. And in this CG video, it's an entirely different character model, so all the details are different. But this is the one that they use in the game. This is the one that players look at the most. But it's amorphous, and they've done details differently. And they're just big kits. The Ancred comes in on 152 pieces, and that doesn't even count the armor. So, you know, they're big. They're big.
So that's the challenge, is also kind of figuring it out, modeling it. I mean, I think we underestimate, you know, the work that you have to do to get some of these props here, even before you start casting or printing them, because of all the 3D work that you do. Maybe tell us a little bit about your process in 3D modeling everything. How did you learn it? How did you get proficient at it? And now, how do you add your own artistic talent into kind of interpreting some of these low resolution files into something, you know, physical and high resolution for us?
So I have taken a single 3D modeling course in my life, and that was in high school. It was one of those mandatory credits. And it was entirely in 3ds Max, which is a program kind of like Blender. It's direct modeling. It's, you know, almost like digital sculpture in some ways, but not quite. There's still a lot of complicated. I could not wrap my head around it. I was terrible with it, and it really put me off 3D modeling for a long time. You know, that was 17, and I didn't start modeling again until I was like, you know, 24 or something. And I was working a little bit with Blender then because it was free and it was available. But, you know, sit down and it takes you 40 minutes to make like a basic belt buckle type shape. It just did not come naturally to me at all. It's not the way I think. And by chance, I ended up trying a parametric modeling program, a CAD-based one. And in those programs, everything is done like it starts from a sketch. So, and the biggest part too for me is that it used real world measurements. One thing that was really frustrating me doing things with direct modeling programs is that you can kind of make something, but it just exists in this digital space. There's no real measurement. So you'd send it to a 3D printer and you have to then figure out how big you want it to be. And because you don't quite know how big it is, you've modeled some details that then when shrunk become too small to be noticed, or you know, they become overwhelmingly sized compared to what they need to be. It was really handy to me to switch to a parametric modeling program where I could say, I want this to be an inch wide, and I would know it would be an inch wide, and when I printed it, it would fit on an inch wide belt, you know? I think that makes so much sense. Not only
so it just clicked with you when you did that.
Yeah, you know, it worked so much more with the way I think. Like, I wouldn't necessarily consider myself a mathematically minded person, but I come from a very like sewing heavy background. So to me, like figuring out, you know, pattern making and how something has to look and the angles of it and how it functions on a human body, that translated so well to me. In a way that my ceramics background did not at all transfer to digital sculpting. So that was really handy to me, is that I could plan everything from the beginning using real world measurements, and I would have an idea of how big it was, what proportion it was. I could make it fit into existing hardware. And suddenly I really took off that way. I went from taking 40 minutes to figure out a belt buckle in Blender to being able to smash something simple like that out in like, you know, 10 minutes in Fusion. Fusion 360 is the one that I used predominantly in the beginning and I still use now. And I think there's a lot of people who can pick up programs like that and immediately be churning out the most beautiful stuff known to mankind. Not so for me. Like it was definitely a long process, but I really can credit the fact that I kept at it. Like I put a lot of my free time into it. I was doing Dangerous Ladies as sort of like a side thing that wasn't, you know, it wasn't paying any bills. It wasn't, you know, supporting me at all. Like I had to have like a 40-hour-a-week job, you know, just like anyone else, if not more. You know, I was working 3 jobs at one point and still put my time into learning this program because it worked for me and I was making things and I was really enjoying it. And then when I managed to get to a point where I was proficient enough to sort of take a risk and go full-time doing commissions for 3D models, suddenly when you're doing it for 40 hours a week, you learn really, really fast. So not even now, you know, doing it for as many hours as I do, like I find I'm still learning, I'm still growing as a 3D modeler, but it really helps to have that time put into it.
For sure. I mean, you spent a lot of time invested in yourself into learning this program. And what about the technology then? How was it converting from those files to printing it? Was there a learning curve for you in terms of learning resin printing, FDM printing, and molding? Or was that pretty easy compared to the modeling part?
I mean, I've always been a very technologically minded person. Like I grew up with my dad having his own business selling Apple computers, so he would have me down in the basement setting up computers for clients and stuff like that. So learning new technology has never been much problem. What I did figure out really fast is that there's 3D printing as a hobby, and then there's 3D printing as a tool. I love it as a tool. I'm not the type of person who like, I don't want the printer itself to be my hobby where I'm tinkering with it and you know, doing my own upgrades and modding it. I just want it to make the thing I want it to make. So there was sort of a learning curve for learning how to use the tool, like anything else. Learning how to hold a power drill straight or how to use a sewing machine and stuff like that. But for me, a big part was like, you know, how can I use this effectively as a tool? And it's worked really well.
So let's talk a little bit about your tools then. You know, now you're a business, it's full time, there's a lot of employees. What kind of printers are you running, and what other things are there that maybe is not 3D printing related that you also use in your business?
So we have, at this moment, we have 7 Ultimakers. We have, it's a lot of them. They're all 2+s, so they are now a retired Ultimaker model. But they're great workhorses. I think the oldest has over 100,000 hours on it.
Wow.
Yeah.
That might be a record. I'll check.
Yeah, I'll check.
With Ultimaker. That might be a record.
Yeah. It's been doing hard work almost, I think it's something like a 66% uptime since 2016.
Wow.
So it works hard.
Yeah.
Yeah, we also have 3 Creality machines, 2 CR10Ss and a Ender 3.
Okay.
Those were brought to the studio by members of our team. And I actually recommend those machines a lot to clients because they are great beginner machines, really, affordable price point. But I love my Ultimakers because they're workhorses. Right. Again, 100,000 hours, especially across all of them. The fact that I can get these older machines and they still run great, I can rely on them.
And are they doing a mix of both prints for customers and your molds, or are they mainly geared for one side or the other?
For the most part, the Ultimakers are doing kits for clients. Okay. We've shifted to doing a lot of our masters on resin printing just because it saves us a ton of hours body shopping.
Better surface quality. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Like, if you're a hobbyist and you're printing things FDM and you sand everything, that's great. But we figure if we're doing a kit that has 150 pieces, we gotta speed things up, and resin is very handy for that. We do use the Enders, the Crealities. We use them a lot to do mold boxes. Okay. Because they're really good at just those really quick space. They can actually do them faster than the Ultimaker. Yeah. They're really good at those straight, uncomplicated lines. Awesome. So we use them a lot for mold boxes. And then occasionally when we do like really big masters, like things like, these masks that don't fit very well on resin printers, then we'll do those at really high resolution on the Ultimakers.
And then you do your sanding work on that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Works well.
So let's talk about your resin printers then. Yes. You also have resin printers.
Yes.
And you have a mix of them. What printers do you have, and how are you deploying those different types of printers? Right.
So we have a Form 3, which does like a lot of our masters, and then we also have an Elegoo Saturn and an Anycubic Photon Mono X. Okay. So we sort of split masters between them, and they have different strengths. Yeah. We definitely find like the customizability of the resin a lot easier on the Anycubic and the Elegoo. Mm-hmm. We've had some projects where we just haven't been able to make work on the form because we needed a very specific color or a very specific material. Right. And we also do sort of balance it by price. So the form makes incredibly beautiful prints. Mm-hmm. Knocks them out of the park, especially compared to the more inexpensive printers. However, the resin is 4 times the cost. Right. So we sort of are very strategic where it's like, if this piece needs to be really, really, really mechanically precise, especially pieces like this, where this can't warp at all, because if this warps, then your mold doesn't work. We had initially printed this piece on I think the Elegoo, and we ended up with a slight bit of warping on the back side. Okay. And what it did is it created a warp on the mold where it created a hole. So you'd pour resin in and it just pour right out. Gotcha. Didn't work. So if we're doing something that has to be really mechanically precise, the form is absolutely the go-to. Mm-hmm. If we're doing something a little more easy, has less in the way of undercuts and stuff like that, cheaper and sometimes faster just to do it on the Anycubic or the Elegoo. For
sure, yeah. I was going to mention that, the difference in materials because, between an open and closed system, there's where you find some of the benefits of having an open system because you can have different colors without making a color kit and so forth. But, I guess the fine tuning for the Formlabs is the pro side of having a closed system because it's more accurate and there's less warpage going on.
So much more accurate, so much easier to operate. Right. Obviously, with inexpensive machines, you have inexpensive parts, which means we've had to routinely do upgrades to the Elegoo and the Anycubic to replace screens and replace the FEP film on the bottom of the tanks. Yeah. And just the way they're designed is not super friendly to that. If our tank on the form runs out or is not printing so well, we get a new tank. The pieces are really simple to replace, all that kind of stuff. On the Anycubic and the Elegoo, you're looking at taking out 36 really cheap screws from the bottom that strip really easily, and you have to manually make sure that screen ends up there perfect. If not, you get a leak, it comes out, it ruins the screen. Yeah. You have to open up the whole machine. It's a whole affair. And just those little design differences in the machines can make a huge difference too. Like the form, if you're ready to change it, because the cover is on a hinge, you can just lift it and pull it up, which is largely hands-free. Yeah. On the cheaper machines, you have to physically use both hands to take the whole cover off, put it aside, do what you need to do, put it back on. Hopefully you don't have resin on your hands at that point. Yeah. Just the different ways that it dispenses resin, the way you interact with the machine. The inexpensive machines are way messier, which is why we're constantly telling people, if you do get a machine and you break into this, then you need to have a garage or you need to have a workshop or someplace ventilated and meant for it, because
contamination could be everywhere.
Everywhere.
Yeah.
And resin is so dangerous.
Right.
It's so dangerous.
Yeah. I think that's something that people don't really think about is, you can have SLA technology and MSLA technology, but there is a little bit of a difference between like production and hobby level, because the requirements are different. You just need it to run forever and ever all the time. And the other one, you can have it run and work whenever you need to. And I think that's some of the big differences. Even just a small thing you mentioned about how the hinge opens the lid is a big deal. To you, if you're opening it like 50 times a day, to do
that adds up. I mean, you can even look at the cases, like no matter how many times we wipe them down, it's like you can see a spot on the cover where, people's fingers are constantly picking it up and putting it down. Form's good though.
Yeah.
Just lifts.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
What else do you do? I know you do a lot of textiles. So talk about that a little bit.
Oh my gosh. So we do a lot of custom printed fabrics, because one of the things we found too when we were getting into this stuff is that people want to make this costume, but then you'll have a character who has like a repeating pattern on a dress or a scarf or something. And you can fabric paint it, you can, and there are a lot of projects where that's actually the best course of action. But there are other things that are just so mechanically produced. Like if you go around in your everyday life, you're not seeing people walking around with like, customs, like, hand painted silks and stuff like that. If you want a character to have the right feel of wearing like a printed shirt, then you need printed fabric. And we found that there are places online where you can make your own custom printed fabric. But there's also a whole skill set with illustrating that and scale and all those sort of things. So we started offering some custom printed fabric, I think 4 or 5 years ago, and we add new things periodically every month or two. I actually brought a bunch.
Awesome.
Because, eat it on the floor. There's a couple different options here. So this is from Twisted Wonderland. This is Azul Ashengrow's socks.
Okay.
So for this, we had to print it on a spandex. Stretchy fabrics are very hard to find on the custom printed market, especially because different companies have different priorities. So Spoonflower does a lot of organics, cottons, and stuff like that, but it means that their stretch catalog isn't always so great. On the other hand, we do a lot of printing through a Quebec-based company called Art of Wear. They do dye sublimation, so they work on a lot of polyesters. We discovered that, a lot of people, they don't want to hand paint or do details like that by hand. But also it's a big cape, and we also don't want to charge someone for enough plain blue fabric to do a whole cape, especially with sizing. So instead we just do the heraldry, because that way clients can, cut out the edge. They have this beautifully, printed, accurate to the game design on it, without all of the effort of having to buy, 3 meters worth of blue velveteen just for this one print. And it's handy too, because, people of different sizes can order it in different sizes. Some people want like a really big dramatic one on the back. Some want a smaller one that, fits maybe their smaller frame or just preference. So we found that fabric printing, we can do a lot of things like that. That's a lot easier for different clients and sort of fits their vision for how they want the costume to be. But then they don't have to spend 20 hours hand painting a griffin. And then sometimes occasionally we've done full actual costume kits. So Eris from Final Fantasy VII Remake has a custom printed pink dress, and then she's got all these matching trims and all this kind of stuff. So we ended up pulling together a full kit that has, the printed fabric for her dress. It's got a slightly different color variation for the trim around the bottom. It's got a lattice for the bottom. And we even threw in matching colored fabric for the bias tapes and for the buttons.
Now, is this a kit that they would still have to sew together themselves?
Absolutely,
okay.
Absolutely. Well, the thing is too is that everybody comes in different sizes and shapes and preferences, right? Some people might feel like, I have a really straight waist. I really want a fuller skirt to sort of, balance me out a bit more. Or, I'm really busty and costumes on the market tend to cater for a very specific body size. And because so many of the costumes on the market come wholesale from Asia, they tend to use Asian sizing. If you wear a size 12 here, you might be wearing a 4XL, in Chinese sizes. And a lot of these wholesale costume places, they stop at XL. And a lot of them don't do custom costumes either. We found that by offering fabrics, all those, all these different things, cosplay is more accessible to people of different sizes. You're not beholden to, you know, oh my God, I have to have a 28-inch waist to fit into these costumes on the market.
And they can customize it to their needs.
Exactly, you know, and it's like, you know, if we were selling finished heiress dresses, you know, and we have done a couple, you know, for specific clients who have asked for them, that's great, but it's a far more valuable use of my time to make the resources for others to make a costume that works for them, instead of for a couple people making this dress, or making 10 dresses in a size medium and catering to the same people who already had that option on the market in the first place.
Now, do they follow some instructions, or is it kind of a guide on your site for them to put this all together?
We offer very little in the way of instruction.
Okay.
One thing for us has always been the time. I have so much respect for people who, you know, sell custom cosplay kits, who do detailed instructions. My friend Kirsty from Indigo Patterns, she'll write 30,000 word instruction novels on how to put together her sewing patterns, which is so cool, so fantastic. For our stuff, we've always sort of had the mentality of, well, one, everybody's going to assemble this a little differently. It's not like a sewing pattern where, you know, there's a certain order of operations to assembling and putting in sleeves and stuff like that. Ours, like, you know, everybody might have different approaches to how they want to put it in the first place, and I wouldn't want instructions to feel like you have to do this way. You know, there's a lot of idea, and especially with like 3D printing props, it's like, how much sanding do you have to do? Or the standard of like, does it have to be good? Does it have to look professional? I don't care about that. I want clients to have a good time. I want clients to feel like they're crafting, right? And you know, and if people have questions on how to do it or how to get the results they want, I'm a chatterbox. You know, I'll respond to those emails, I'll respond to those messages, I'll sit down with people at a convention and chat about it. I'm super happy to share how I do things, but I don't want anyone to feel beholden to a singular way to how it should be put together.
Gotcha. Awesome.
Another thing we found too with custom printing is it allows us to do repeated prints. So something like this, you could see a lot of people do, you could do that with a block stamp. You could make a stamp for that piece and you could stamp it all over the place. But one thing we found too is that a lot of people are crafting out of apartments or even their bedrooms, you know. Not a lot of people have enough space to spread out 3 meters worth of fabric and get messy painting all this. I know from experience too, I lived in an apartment for a long time. You may not have an in-suite washer and dryer. So doing things like setting fabric paints or washing fabrics before you stuff can be a nightmare. And again, some people just don't want to take the time to repeatedly make the same pattern over and over again. They'd rather be doing other parts of the costume. So, you know, even doing something like that, like a custom liner, is one less thing for people to do. Really
I feel like the theme here is you're just enabling people to get in the way they want to.
I'm an enabler. I want people to make things. And again, like, you know, early on when I went to a convention and I just saw, you know, 10 people in the same costume, the same store-bought costume. And just the idea is like, you know, I grew up in a cosplay community where everything was handmade. And there's nothing wrong with buying. I'm super happy to see people buy things and do. And a lot of our clients buy the costume and then buy the kit and upgrade it and accessorize and stuff. That's phenomenal. But I want people who craft to have that opportunity to sort of get materials and then make whatever they want with it. It's super handy. That's super important to me, especially because, you know, I'm very much a person who I've sort of faded out of the dress up part of it. I'll still do it, I still enjoy it, but most of the time I'm happier during the hundreds of hours I spend crafting than the 6 hours I'm wearing the costume.
So and you still get the pleasure of seeing your clients wear it too.
Yes, you know, like I love seeing other people in it. You know, I get so much pleasure and enjoyment out of seeing other people's projects, even than I do just wearing my own. That's really special to me. So it is exciting to me when clients, like, you know, reply back saying like, hey, I went to the con, here's pictures of me in the costume. I love that. That's super exciting. I love seeing where things end up.
So if I were to take it back from the beginning, it seems like, you know, the industry improved, the technology improved, and the community, you know, kind of rose up to support all of this. So can you tell me what you think would happen maybe 5-10 years down into the future? What would your business look like? What would the community look like?
I think we'll be doing a lot less physical kits and a lot more files. We've definitely already seen that in the past 2 or 3 years. People shifting from one to the other as 3D printers have become much more available and much more easily accessible. I think probably at least 2 or 3 times a week, I have a conversation with a client where I'm like, well, this custom project that you want from us, it would cost this much. But just to let you know, if you invested that money in a printer and just got the files from us, then the printer would basically have paid for itself already, and then you have that printer for future projects. And like there are a lot of people who have sort of, I don't know how to describe it, but maybe they're like not entirely accurate ideas about 3D printing. I think there's a lot of boogeyman type arguments about it, that they're super hard to maintain, that they're ludicrously expensive, all that kind of stuff. When the reality is, like, printing has never been more accessible. And I think it's just going to become more and more accessible all the time. You can get like little starter machines for $150 now. And if paying someone else to print you a kit is going to cost you $150, you might as well buy the machine,
and learn it.
Right? It's like if you spend $10, $15 on a file, or get a free one from Thingiverse, and then maybe it costs $10 worth of plastic to print a whole 46-inch sword, that machine pays for itself very, very quickly. And we've seen a lot of clients go from making maybe one prop every few years to suddenly making 4 or 5 a year, just because it's more accessible. So my guess is that in 5 years, many, many more people are going to have 3D printers. We're going to be doing a lot fewer physical kits, because more people are going to be doing those themselves.
That's great.
And I think a lot of people are going to transition into 3D modeling themselves, which is really cool.
Amazing. Now, do you see the next generation of cosplayers starting to bud? Like, are we seeing more kids doing it, more parents doing it with their kids? Do you see that happening?
There's definitely a lot more parents involved in cosplay now. I do think that the community is always trending younger. I think the average cosplayer has always stayed late teens, early 20s. That was true when I was 12, and it's true now when I'm 32. There's sort of like an age, and it is like a sweet spot for a lot of cosplayers, because you're generally still living with your parents, so you don't have a lot of expenses. You probably have a part-time job, which means you have a lot more disposable income, and you're going to class. This sound like bad of me, I guess, but when I was in university, I was still cosplaying, and it was like, oh, I have all this time to make costumes. Maybe I could have been doing more readings or doing more, school-related curriculars, but I was making costumes. It's a great time to cosplay, frankly, and you're young, you're cute, all of those things. I think the cosplay community is always going to have like a strong trend towards late teens and early 20s, but there definitely are a lot more older folk in the community now. A lot of people who decide, I might have kids now, I might be getting my 30s or 40s, but I'm still going to cosplay, like, why give it up? I don't think as many people now are beholden to a sort of like strict, rigid 9-to-5 job where they have to have like a super, almost like serious, it's also never been cooler to be into nerd stuff, I feel like when I started cosplay, if you were like, oh, I'm into superhero comics, people are like, what? I think a lot of people wouldn't even consider that as something that was still going on. They sort of imagine the Silver Age and stuff. But now it's like, if you don't know superheroes, have you been living under a rock?
Totally,
Yeah. Nerd culture has never been more easily accessible. And I think because of that, older folks in fandom who have, been in nerdy stuff since they were in their, their teens and 20s, it's easier than ever for them to be like, I like this. I'm just going to keep doing this. I'm not going to stop just because I'm older.
It kind of feels like now your business, your team, your business is kind of fulfilling the dreams of a younger you.
Yeah, I wish we had these resources. I remember when I was, 14, and if you had a wig with your cosplay, that was the coolest thing, because where do you get wigs in 2004? You had to maybe find like a specialist shop that only sold it in natural colors. It certainly wasn't any anime thing. So I remember there was this one girl, Katie Bear, who made wigs, and because she had access to a wig company that actually made colorful wigs, she would buy them and push them to people who, and ship them to you. So being able to access wigs was this big deal. And now you can get them on Amazon. You can get them anywhere. I would have killed back then to have access to 3D printing and all that kind of stuff.
Now you have access to all these printers and designs on computer. It's an amazing place we're in now, and we're enabled so much by technology, and then people like you who are also leading the industry and kind of showing people how they can get from something very simple to something very elaborate if they put in the time and effort for it.
Yeah.
So just to end off then, and to wrap things up, where can people find you and your work?
So we're on Instagram at The Dangerous Ladies. We're on Twitter at Dangerous Ladies. We're on Etsy at Dangerous Ladies. And we're at Store Envy at Dangerous Ladies.
Amazing. Jenn, thank you for coming by and sharing with us your techniques, your business, and your passion for the industry. Wish you all the best. Thanks for joining us for Talk3D.
Most welcome. Thank you so much for having me.